14, I learned exactly where I stood in my family, beneath my sister Hannah, the golden child. When she got pregnant at 17 by Jake, a 19-year-old walking red flag, I thought my parents would finally see reason. Nope. Mom cried happy tears about being a young grandma, while Dad just stared at his plate, as usual, too spineless to push back. Meanwhile, I sat there, stunned. If I had gotten a girl pregnant at 14, they'd have shipped me off to military school before I could even finish my sentence. But for Hannah, a hug and a celebration. That's when I realized the rules didn't apply to her. They never had. When I got a C in math, I lost my gaming privileges for a month. When Hannah failed 2 classes, Mom coddled her and bought her a new phone. And Jake, a freeloading, job-hopping disaster with a neck tattoo that read, "No regrets." Ironic, considering his life choices. He showed up uninvited, raided our fridge like he paid rent, and talked to my parents like they were lucky to have him around. Even when I caught him bragging about stealing from his ex's dad, Mom just brushed it off. People deserve second chances, honey. Yeah? Where was mine? Growing up as the afterthought messes with you. I spent years trying to earn their attention. Good grades, clean room, extracurriculars. Nothing worked. Hannah could set the house on fire, and they'd blame faulty wiring. One night, when I was 12 and she was 15, we both had events. My science fair and her chorus concert. Guess where my parents went? That's right. They watched Hannah sing one line in a group number while I stood alone next to my project, the one I had spent weeks perfecting. My teacher kept asking where my parents were, and I lied. They got stuck in traffic. That night, something in me changed. I stopped trying. And 10 years later, when karma came knocking, I made sure they finally knew what it felt like to be an afterthought. A week after Hannah's pregnancy announcement, Mom called a family meeting, and I knew this wasn't going to end well for me. Hannah arrived late, of course, dramatically rubbing her back and whining about the burden of carrying a whole human. Mom practically sprinted to fetch her special pregnancy pillow, while I sat there, biting back an eye roll. Then came the bombshell. With the baby on the way, they had to rethink the living arrangements, which was just a sugar-coated way of saying I was being kicked out. They were sending me to live with my grandparents in Florida so Hannah could have my room for the nursery. "It's only temporary," Mom said without even looking at me. "Hannah needs our support system right now." I turned to Dad, hoping, praying he'd say something. He barely met my eyes. "It'll be good for you," he muttered. "Grandma and Grandpa have that nice pool." Like a freaking pool was supposed to make up for being exiled from my own home. Then Hannah, with that smug, self-satisfied tone, had the audacity to say, "You should be grateful. At least you won't have to deal with midnight crying and diaper changes." Then, laughing like it was some kind of joke, she added, "Plus, I've always wanted your room. It gets way better sunlight for the baby." My stomach dropped. They were talking about my entire life, like I wasn't even in the room. No protest, no hesitation. Just decided. I waited for the punchline, for someone to say, "Just kidding," or offer an alternative. Nothing. "When exactly am I supposed to leave?" I finally asked, my voice barely steady. Mom casually scrolled through her phone. "Grandma and Grandpa said any time, but we figured after the school year. That gives you 6 weeks to say goodbye." 6 weeks. 6 weeks to abandon my friends, my school, my life. Like none of it mattered. I had lived here forever. This was home. Do I get a say in this? I already knew the answer. Mom gave me her fake sympathy voice. "Sweetheart, sometimes families have to make tough decisions. This is what's best for everyone. Everyone except me." "Don't be so dramatic, dans sommerlager," Hannah sighed. "It's not like you're going to prison. Florida has beaches and stuff. I don't even remember what I said next. I just remember the exact moment I realized I was nothing to them. When Mom started talking about repainting my room, the same room I had begged to paint dark blue just last year. Now, it was going to be a nice, sunny yellow. My posters coming down, my bookshelves already being cleared for baby supplies. I sat there, watching them plan my erasure, as if I wasn't sitting right there. But what about my school, my friends, soccer tryouts? I asked, my voice tight. You'll make new friends. Mom waved it off. And Florida schools are probably better anyway. I glanced at Hannah, searching for even a flicker of guilt. Nothing. She was on her phone. Then, barely glancing up, she sighed. Can we wrap this up? I have dinner plans with Jake. That night, I locked myself in my room and cried harder than I had in years. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The next. Hannah started moving baby stuff into my room before I had even packed. Mom and Hannah went shopping for baby clothes, but when I asked for new sneakers for Florida, we need to budget. One day, I came home from school and found my books, my escape, my safe place, shoved into boxes in the hallway. We need the shelf for the baby, Mom said, like it was obvious. You weren't taking those to Florida anyway, right? Just like that, packed away like I didn't exist. And if that wasn't enough, Jake started showing up more, making himself comfortable, like he already owned the place. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and froze. Jake was lounging on the couch wearing my favorite Bulls hoodie, like it was his. Hey, that's mine, I snapped, my voice tight with anger. He didn't even look up, just smirked and said, Relax, kid. Not like you'll need warm clothes in Florida. My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. I turned to Mom, expecting her to back me up. Instead, she barely glanced up from her phone. Stop making a scene, she sighed, like I was the problem. Behind her back, Jake shot me a smug grin, knowing he had won. I never saw that hoodie again. He probably sold it or left it in some random parking lot, and things only got worse from there. Mom and Hannah started openly planning the baby's room right in front of me, speaking like I wasn't even in the room. We can put the changing table where his desk was, Mom mused. We'll probably need to get rid of the bed too. Cribs take up so much space. My chest tightened as they casually erased me from my own home. I tried venting to my friends, but they just thought moving to Florida sounded cool. Dude, the beach. Maybe you'll see an alligator. No one understood I wasn't going on vacation. I was being exiled. Kevin was the only one who got it. That's some serious BS, man, he said, shaking his head. They're throwing you out for something that isn't even your fault. It felt good to hear someone say it out loud, but it didn't change a damn thing. The only person who could change it was my dad, and I tried one last time to make him see reason. I caught him in the garage one night, absent-mindedly sorting his tools like he was avoiding reality. Dad, why do I have to leave? Why can't Hannah and Jake get their own place? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Sometimes families have to make sacrifices. Yeah, I shot back. Then why am I the only one sacrificing? He hesitated, then shook his head. Doesn't matter what I think, son. You know that. And I saw it then. The exhaustion in his eyes, the resignation in his voice. He had stopped fighting Mom years ago, maybe even before I was born. And if I stayed, I'd become just like him. Desperate, I went to my guidance counselor, thinking maybe an adult outside my family would listen. She seemed concerned at first, even called my parents in for a meeting. But the second we walked into her office, Mom turned on the charm, spinning some fairy tale about how this was a wonderful opportunity for me to bond with my grandparents. This is a family decision, she said smoothly, and we're all making sacrifices together. The counselor bought it, and as we walked out, Mom leaned in, squeezing my shoulder so hard it hurt. "Don't ever embarrass this family again," she whispered, her voice ice cold. The final straw came that night. I overheard Hannah on the phone laughing. "Yeah, it's perfect. The brat's getting shipped off so the baby gets a full nursery, and Mom's helping with night feedings so I can still go out when I want." My stomach twisted. I wasn't her brother. I was just in the way. The day before I left, I went to the old treehouse in the woods behind our neighborhood. Dad and I built it when I was 7, one of the only times he had actually spent real time with me. I hadn't been there in years, but suddenly I needed to see it. But when I got there, my stomach dropped. The ladder was ripped down. Jake was here was spray painted across the front. The window was smashed, beer cans and cigarette butts littering the floor. My last safe place? Gone, just like everything else in my life. That night, I packed my bags in silence. No one made a special dinner. No one said anything, like I was already gone. Mom was glued to her laptop, helping Hannah build the perfect baby registry, scrolling through designer strollers and monogrammed onesies, like it was the most important mission of her life. Dad sat in his recliner, barely acknowledging my existence, his eyes locked on whatever mindless TV show was playing. Meanwhile, I sat alone on the floor of my nearly empty room, a pizza box beside me, the one meal I bought with my own money, since no one had even bothered to ask if I wanted dinner. My bed had already been disassembled, the crib arriving that morning like a final nail in the coffin of my place in that house. And just like that, I was gone. Florida was a whole different world. My grandparents, thankfully, were nothing like my parents. Grandma actually cared. She asked real questions about my day, not just some obligatory, "How's school?" Before tuning me out, Grandpa was quiet but steady, always out in his workshop, where he eventually invited me to help. "You've got a good eye for detail," he told me one day, watching as I carefully lined up the dovetail joints on a small wooden box. I shrugged, unused to compliments. Later that evening, he placed that same box on the mantel like it was a trophy, bragging about how his grandson had built it with his own hands. For the first time in my life, someone was actually proud of me. But high school? That was brutal. New kid, new state, new accent. Apparently having a northern accent in Florida was some kind of novelty. On my first day, when someone asked why I moved, I hesitated before mumbling the truth. My sister got pregnant, so my parents sent me here to make room for the baby. The kid stared at me, wide-eyed. Dude, that's messed up. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud, and I nearly lost it right there in the cafeteria. I kept my head down for the first month, eating lunch alone, heading straight home after school, pretending I was fine, until one afternoon sitting at the kitchen table, I cracked, silent tears at first, then full-on sobbing. Grandma sat beside me, rubbing my back, saying nothing until I calmed down. Then, in that soft but firm voice of hers, she said, "What your parents did wasn't right, and you're allowed to be angry. Just don't let that anger eat you alive." I held on to those words like a life raft. Back home, my parents barely called. When they did, it was awkward small talk, followed by endless FaceTime sessions of Mom showing off pictures of Hannah's baby, Charlotte. Dad would pop in for 10 seconds at the end with his usual, "Be good for your grandparents," before hanging up. Hannah never called, until one day, 3 months in, when her name lit up my phone. For a second, I thought maybe she actually missed me. But no. She wanted me to convince Grandma and Grandpa to send more money for Charlotte's christening gift. I hung up mid-sentence. My 15th birthday rolled around, and my parents mailed a card that showed up 3 days late. Inside, a $25 iTunes gift card and a generic "Hope you're doing well." "No, we miss you." No wish we could be there. But Grandma and Grandpa, they threw me a real party, a homemade cake, a small gathering with their friends, and a trip to pick out a decent laptop for school. The contrast was so stark, it was almost funny. Slowly I adjusted. I found my footing, joined the computer club, and met people who actually cared. Nathan, a kid from my neighborhood, became a solid friend, and for the first time in my life I realized something. I wasn't losing a family. I was building one, a better one. Nathan got it in a way most people didn't. His parents were divorced, and he spent his life bouncing between two houses, always caught in someone else's drama. He understood what it meant to be a guest in your own home. But for the first time in my life, I had something that felt like mine. Computers. My new laptop became an obsession. I devoured everything I could find: coding tutorials, hardware repair guides, graphic design basics. Grandpa noticed and started bringing home broken electronics from yard sales, tossing them onto the garage workbench with a grin. Either you fix it, or it was already broken. No harm done. He had no idea how much those words meant to me. I threw myself into school, acing every class, joining the computer club, and at 16 landing a part-time job at Best Buy. Grandpa taught me about saving money, investing, making sure I was never financially dependent on anyone. I listened. Every dollar I earned, I put away, fueling a plan that had been growing in the back of my mind, a way to make sure no one, least of all my parents, could ever treat me like an afterthought again. Best Buy changed everything. It wasn't just a paycheck, it was hands-on experience. My manager, Steve, saw potential in me. Kids got a knack for finding the problem, he'd tell the other employees, passing me the trickiest repair jobs. For the first time, I was recognized for what I was good at. By junior year, I had built a real life, friends, a spot on the track team, even a girlfriend, Victoria. She eventually moved to California for college, but we stayed friends. And the best part? Some days I went weeks without thinking about my parents or Hannah. The anger dulled from a sharp blade to a distant ache. Then Thanksgiving happened. Grandma insisted we visit, so I went. The moment I stepped into the house, it was like I had never existed. My old room, unrecognizable, pink walls, a crib, a changing table, Charlotte's room now. Hannah was still living at home, Charlotte now a toddler. Jake was still between jobs, which meant he spent the entire visit on the couch, playing video games, pretending to be too busy to acknowledge me. The worst part? They acted like nothing had happened, like me getting shipped off was some normal family decision. Mom kept saying things like, "Oh, we should show you the new mall. They renovated after you left," as if I had just been off at summer camp, not exiled from my own family. The only moment of honesty came late at night when Dad pulled me aside. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. "I should have handled things differently," he admitted. "I'm sorry." It was something, but it wasn't enough. Too little, too late. That visit solidified everything. I couldn't wait to get back to Florida, my real home. When I graduated at 18, my parents flew down for the ceremony, awkward as hell, acting like the last 4 years had never happened. Mom showed off pictures of Charlotte to my grandparents' neighbors, gushing about what an amazing young mother Hannah was, despite her challenges. Challenges meaning Jake's constant disappearing act, her getting fired from every job she touched, and her nights out that left my mom babysitting more than Hannah did. But to Mom, Hannah was still this brave, struggling angel, deserving of endless praise for doing the bare minimum. That night at dinner, I dropped the bomb. "I'm not coming back." Mom blinked. "What?" "I'm staying in Florida, got my own place, starting my own computer repair business." Dad just nodded like he'd seen it coming all along. "But Mom?" She looked blindsided. "But don't you want to come home?" Her voice was laced with genuine confusion. "Your room is still there." I met her gaze, unflinching. Number, my home is here now. And for the first time, I meant it. The shock on my mother's face was almost comical. Did she really expect me to come crawling back to the place where I'd been discarded like a piece of unwanted furniture? That I'd willingly step into a house where my existence had been painted over with pastel pink walls and baby furniture? Later that night, Grandpa pulled me aside, his usual gruffness softening as he pressed something into my hand. A check for $5,000. "Seed money for your business," he said. "Don't tell your grandmother. She thinks we're just helping with your first month's rent." He gave me a knowing wink before adding, "I believe in you, kid." And in that moment I understood something. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who make space for you, who see your worth, who stand in your corner when no one else does. My grandparents were more family to me than my own parents had ever been. From 18 to 24, I poured everything into building my IT consulting business from scratch. I wasn't rich, but I was independent, stable, everything my parents never thought I'd be. The first few years were brutal. I lived in a cramped studio apartment that permanently smelled like the Indian restaurant downstairs. Days were spent fixing computers, nights were for taking certification courses, and weekends meant cold calling businesses, trying to convince them I was worth a shot. Sleep was a luxury. At first, I was just the cheap alternative to big repair shops, removing viruses, upgrading hardware, recovering lost data. My bike doubled as my company vehicle because a car wasn't in the budget. Then, my break came. A local accounting firm's server crashed, and they were quoted thousands to fix it. I restored their data in one afternoon, for a few hundred. The owner was so impressed, he put me on a monthly retainer, my first real business contract. From there, things snowballed. Word of mouth spread. I hired my first employee at 20, a community college kid who knew networking like the back of his hand. By 22, I had an office space. By 24, a 5-person team, including an office manager to handle all the headaches I didn't want to deal with. But the best part? The power. The knowledge that no one could ever ship me off again. No one could take away what I built. I controlled my future now. Meanwhile, back home, Hannah, now 27, was exactly where she had been 10 years ago. Still living with our parents. Still unemployed more often than not. Charlotte, now 10, was growing up in the same cycle of excuses and entitlement. Hannah had dropped out of community college after one semester, blaming the workload. Jobs never lasted more than a few months before she quit or got fired. The manager was unfair. The customers were rude. The hours were too demanding. But the truth, she never had to try because my parents were always there to catch her. Jake, in and out of her life like a stray cat. By the time Charlotte was 3, he had gotten another girl pregnant, sparking more family drama. A couple of years later, he got himself arrested for driving on a suspended license, with an unregistered gun in the car. Real Father of the Year material. Every now and then, I'd get sparse updates through Dad's awkward calls or holiday cards filled with empty pleasantries. Nothing ever changed. On Charlotte's 7th birthday, I sent her a tablet preloaded with educational games and e-books. If nothing else, the kid deserved a chance at something better than what she was surrounded by. I never got a thank you from Hannah, but I didn't expect one. By then, I had learned exactly who my family was and who they weren't. The moment I saw Hannah's text, I already knew what to expect. Bare minimum effort, zero sincerity. A blurry photo of Charlotte clutching the tablet, followed by, "She says thanks for the iPad." It wasn't even an iPad, but of course, she wouldn't care enough to notice the difference. No genuine appreciation, no acknowledgement of the time I'd spent picking out age-appropriate apps, just a casual afterthought. I told myself not to let it get to me, but it did. Not because I needed gratitude, but because it was proof. Nothing had changed. Hannah was still the same selfish, entitled person, and my parents were still enabling her. At this point, they were practically raising Charlotte while Hannah half-heartedly worked at a nail salon and spent her free time going out. Mom, as always, defended her, calling her a young, free spirit who just needed time to find herself. Meanwhile, Dad sounded more exhausted with every rare phone call. The last real conversation we had, he admitted he was delaying retirement to keep financially supporting Hannah. He was 55, battling back pain and high blood pressure, and instead of enjoying the life he'd worked for, he was still paying his almost 30-year-old daughter's bills. I kept my distance. Holiday cards, the occasional birthday text, and gifts for Charlotte, always educational, always carefully chosen. But I had never met her in person, which was a strange realization. I had a niece I only knew through screens. My grandparents, though, they never made me feel like an obligation. They were my real family. When Grandpa passed away 2 years ago, peacefully in his sleep, it wrecked me. Harder than anything I'd felt about my immediate family in years. I still call Grandma twice a week, visit for Sunday dinner whenever I can. The funeral was one of the worst days of my life. Not just because of the loss, but because of what it revealed. My parents showed up. Hannah didn't. Her excuse? Couldn't find a sitter, which was utter bullshit. My parents could have watched Charlotte, but the truth was, she just didn't care enough to make the drive. Grandpa, the man who had saved me, who had been more of a father than my own, wasn't worth the inconvenience. And yet, my mother had the nerve to turn the funeral into a performance, sobbing dramatically, acting like she had been the devoted daughter when she'd barely visited or called in the last decade. Dad, at least, was genuinely grieving. He handled the arrangements, stepped up in ways I hadn't expected, and for that I appreciated him. But then, as I was leaving, I overheard Mom telling one of Grandma's friends how, "We're just so worried about how he's coping," how they had offered for him to come stay with us for a while. A complete lie. They hadn't done a damn thing. That was Mom, always playing for an audience. On my 23rd birthday, I got my first direct message from Hannah in over a year. "Happy B-Day, bro. No capitalization, no name." An hour later, another text followed. "Hey, can you loan me $800? Car repairs?" I didn't respond. Over the next week, her messages escalated from casual follow-ups to guilt-tripping. The final one was almost impressive in its audacity. "I guess you don't care about your own niece's safety. She needs a reliable car to get to school." I finally replied, "Ask Jake or Mom and Dad. They're your support system, remember?" That shut her up. That's the thing about people like Hannah. They only remember you exist when they need something. A decade of silence, and suddenly, we're family when it's time to open my wallet. Meanwhile, I was too busy actually building a life. My business was thriving. I had solid friends, dated here and there, nothing serious but not for lack of options. For the first time in my life, I was truly happy. Sometimes I wondered, what if my parents had forced Hannah to grow up instead of throwing me away? What if they had held her accountable instead of sacrificing me for her convenience? Would I still be the same person? It didn't matter. I wasn't searching for silver linings, but I'd made peace with the truth. Being forced to rely on myself had made me stronger. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. Mom's number, a Tuesday afternoon. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Your sister was in a car accident," Mom's voice wavered. "She's okay, but she broke her leg in 3 places, fractured her hip. The doctors say she can't work for at least 6 to 8 months." I said nothing. I was waiting. Because I knew what was asinsi, coming next. And Jake left for good. Jake was gone, took the first exit out, ran off to California with some girl he met online because he couldn't handle the pressure. That's what Mom said, her voice shaking as if she hadn't seen this coming from miles away. We're struggling with medical bills, taking care of Charlotte. Your father's hours got cut, and my arthritis is getting worse. A pause, a deep breath, and then she finally got to the point. We were hoping you could visit, reconnect with the family, meet Charlotte properly. Your father really misses you. Translation? The golden child was down for the count. Her deadbeat ex had abandoned ship for good. And now, they remembered they had another kid, one who wasn't a financial black hole. I stared at my phone long after hanging up. 10 years. It took a decade of silence and a financial disaster for them to acknowledge me, not out of love or regret, but out of need. Part of me wanted to ignore them completely, but then I thought about Charlotte, 10 years old, caught in a mess she never made. None of this was her fault, and maybe, just maybe, a small, bitter part of me wanted them to see what I had become without them. I called Mom back and agreed to visit, but I booked a hotel. No way was I spending the night on their couch like some guest in the house I once called home. Walking through that front door felt surreal. The walls were covered in photos. Charlotte at every stage of childhood, Hannah grinning next to her. Out of all the framed memories, I spotted just 2 of myself, a dusty high school graduation picture and a school portrait from when I was 12. My old room? A pastel explosion of unicorns and pink. Hannah was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her leg propped up in a cast. She barely glanced up. "Oh, you actually came," she said flatly, like I was the one who had disappeared for a decade. Mom hovered nervous while Dad pulled me into a tight hug, whispering, "I've missed you." He looked older, worn down, like the years had taken more from him than he was willing to admit. Then Charlotte walked in and everything shifted. Bright, curious, none of Hannah's entitlement. At first she was hesitant, but the second she found out I worked with computers, she lit up, firing off questions about coding, games, how technology worked. And for the first time that day, I smiled. That night, after Charlotte went to bed, they finally got to the point. The mortgage was behind. The medical bills were piling up. They couldn't afford Charlotte's private school tuition. And Hannah couldn't work. "We know it's a lot to ask," Mom said, her voice drenched in forced humility, "but you're doing so well. We thought maybe you could help." Hannah, who had barely acknowledged me all evening, suddenly looked interested. "Yeah, bro, it must be nice having all that freedom and money." I let the words hang in the air before responding. "I'll help." Mom exhaled in relief, tears pooling in her eyes, but I wasn't finished. "I have conditions." I met their eyes one by one. "I'm not handing out cash. I'll cover Charlotte's basic needs, school, medical bills, but I'll pay them directly. None of it goes through you." I looked at Mom, then Hannah. "And Dad handles everything, not either of you." Hannah's smile disappeared instantly. "What? You don't trust us?" I leveled her with a stare. "No, actually, I don't." Mom looked wounded, but Dad? He just nodded. "That's fair," he admitted. "You have no reason to trust us." And then I delivered the final condition. "Once you're physically able, Hannah, you enroll in job training." She scoffed. "This is bullshit." She stormed off, her cast thudding against the floor. But Dad surprised me. He nodded again. "It's more than fair." As I stepped outside, ready to leave, Dad followed me to my car. His voice was quiet. "I should have stood up for you back then. It was easier to go along with your mother and Hannah. I've regretted it every day since you left. I didn't say I forgave him. I wasn't there yet, but I acknowledged it with a nod. Take care of Charlotte. She deserves better than all this." Driving back to my hotel, I realized something. I didn't hate them anymore. I just felt sorry for them. They had created this mess, enabled it, fed it, and now they were drowning in it. Meanwhile, I was free, the forgotten son who had built something from nothing. Maybe, just maybe one day, I'd have a real relationship with Charlotte. Maybe even with Dad. But for now, the simple fact that they had finally come crawling back, after years of making me feel like I was disposable, was enough. It wasn't an apology, and it sure as hell wasn't redemption, but it was a reckoning. A silent acknowledgement that the son they had cast aside was now the only one holding the lifeline they so desperately needed. Edit. Wow. Didn't expect this to blow up. Thanks for the awards and comments. Just to clear up the timeline, I'm 24 now. I was 14 when they sent me to Florida. Hannah was 17 when she got pregnant, and now she's 27 with a 10-year-old daughter. Edit 2. Some of you asked for updates. Yes, I'm still helping with Charlotte's expenses, but only through Dad. Hannah? She's still not working, despite being cleared by doctors months ago. She's thinking about taking online classes, has been thinking about it for 6 months now. Mom, of course, keeps making excuses. The good news? Charlotte and I have built a real relationship. We video chat once a week, talk about books and coding. She's bright, really bright, smarter than I was at her age. And if nothing else, I'm trying to be the person I wish I had when I was growing up. Edit 3. To those saying I should cut them off entirely, I get it. Believe me, I do. But Charlotte is innocent in all of this. I refuse to punish her for her mother's mistakes. And no, I didn't move back. My life is in Florida now. I visit occasionally to see Charlotte and, surprisingly, Dad. Edit 4. Thanks for all the support. I never expected this to resonate with so many people. And to those asking, if something ever happened to my parents, would I take Charlotte in? No hesitation. In a heartbeat. She deserves a real chance at a life that isn't filled with broken promises and excuses. And for those who've shared their own stories, I see you. I hope you find the peace I'm still working toward. Edit 5. Final update, because this has gotten way bigger than I expected. A lot of you are wondering if Grandma knows I'm helping my parents financially. Yes, she knows, and she supports my decision. But make no mistake, her opinion of my sister is unfiltered. Let's just say she has choice words I won't repeat here. But she also taught me something valuable. Being the bigger person doesn't mean letting people take advantage of you. It means setting firm boundaries while still doing what's right. And that's what I'm doing. Miss you, Grandpa. Wish you could see the man I've become.